In 1821, a young Italian explorer named Giovanni Battista Belzoni pried open a massive stone head from the sands of the Theban plain. It weighed several tons. It had been lying face up in the dust for over 3,000 years, staring at the sky. He shipped it to the British Museum, where it still sits today, and it inspired Percy Bysshe Shelley to write one of the most famous poems in the English language. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. But here is what Shelley never knew, what almost no one knew until very recently. That colossal, fallen face belonged to a place that was far more than a monument to ego. It was a living city, a machine of empire, and hidden within its walls was a secret that would remain buried for 3,000 years. The Ramesseum. Built on the western bank of Luxor, ancient Thebes, by Ramesses II, the pharaoh who ruled Egypt for 66 years in the 13th century BCE. This was his memorial temple, his declaration, written in stone, that he had been here and that he had mattered. What remains today is extraordinary even in ruin. Two enormous entrance gates, the pylons, still reach toward the sky. 29 massive columns survive from a hypostyle hall that once held 48 of them, their capitals supporting stone ceilings painted with astronomical charts, stars, planets, the endless Egyptian sky rendered in lapis and ochre. Behind the hall, a room whose ceiling still carries images of the celestial bodies, and behind that, vast brick storehouses stretching into the desert, the logistics backbone of a temple complex that fed, clothed, and employed hundreds. The entire compound was enclosed by a massive mud brick wall. Inside, the temple itself, a royal pavilion to the pharaoh's left, workshops and residences on the right, and a canal running westward to the Nile. This was not merely a place of worship. This was an ancient city unto itself, and at the center of it all, war. Or at least, the memory of war. Carved across both entrance pylons, across the walls of Luxor Temple, Karnak, and Abu Simbel, the same scene, repeated over and over across Egypt like a royal obsession. The Battle of Kadesh, fought around 1274 BCE against the Hittite Empire in what is now modern Syria. Ramesses II depicted himself single-handedly holding the line, surrounded by enemies, saved by divine intervention, victorious against impossible odds. The accompanying text, the so-called Poem of Pentuer, reads like a Hollywood blockbuster. The young pharaoh charges alone into 10,000 enemy chariots. The god Amun fills him with divine strength. He prevails. The reality, according to historians, was considerably messier. The battle was almost certainly a stalemate. Both sides took heavy losses. A peace treaty followed, possibly the oldest surviving written peace agreement in human history. Ramesses did not conquer. He negotiated, and yet he carved his version of events on every wall he could find. He made sure that when future generations walked through the Ramesseum, they would see his truth, not the historical record. This is the first mystery of the Ramesseum, not what happened at Kadesh, but why a man who ruled for 66 years, who survived long enough to watch most of his own sons die before him, who left more monuments than almost any other pharaoh in history, why did he return, again and again, to a single, inconclusive battle? What was he trying to prove? What was he trying to bury? In the first courtyard, the answer may lie in stone. What remains of the seated statue of Ramesses II is just the upper half, fallen, broken, face up in the dust, exactly as Belzoni found it. But when it stood, this was a figure 18 meters tall, including its pedestal. Its estimated weight, approximately 1,000 tons. For scale, the Statue of Liberty, from base to torch, is 93 meters. The statue of Ramesses was 18, and it weighed 1,000 tons. Think about that. Moving it required an organizational infrastructure that we still do not fully understand. No wheels capable of bearing such weight, no cranes, no engines. Thousands of workers, miles of rope, wooden sledges, water to reduce friction on desert sand, and an administrative system capable of feeding, housing, coordinating, and directing that workforce for months, perhaps years. Someone had to plan this. Someone had to teach the next generation how to do it. Someone had to produce the scribes, the engineers, the architects, the administrators who kept this empire running. And for a long time, no one knew exactly where. Behind the temple, stretching backward toward the cliffs, are the storehouses. Long barrel-vaulted chambers built from mud brick, visible even today from the elevated road above the site. Grain, oil, linen. The material wealth of a vast agricultural estate, flowing inward from the Nile through the temple's private canal. The Ramesseum was not merely a religious site. Ritual offerings and hymns were part of it, yes, but it was also an economic engine, a redistribution center, a node in the vast web of Egyptian state power. Temples like this owned land, employed craftsmen, supported entire villages. They were the ancient world's version of an institution, part government, part bank, part church. And like every institution, they required administrators. People who could read, calculate, write in formal hieroglyphic script, navigate the complexities of Egyptian bureaucracy, understand the religious calendar, manage resources, compose official letters. Where did those people come from? For generations, that question had no architectural answer. Texts described the system. No one had ever found the room. There is something about the western bank of Luxor that has always resisted full understanding. The Egyptians called it the land of the dead, the place where the sun sets, where the pharaohs built their tombs in the Valley of the Kings, where the memorial temples lined the edge of the cultivation like sentinels between the living world and whatever lay beyond. For 3 millennia, people have been digging here. Greek tourists carved their names into temple walls in antiquity. Roman soldiers camped among the ruins. Arab villagers built homes inside the storehouses of the Ramesseum itself, living among the ghosts of the ancient administration. And still, the site gave up its secrets slowly, reluctantly, one fragment at a time. Archaeologists have worked the Ramesseum systematically since the 19th century. They mapped the pylons, documented the reliefs, cataloged the columns. They knew the storehouses were there. They knew the outline of the mud brick enclosure wall. What they did not know, what no one knew with certainty, was what occupied the space between the back of the temple and the edges of the compound. The administrative zone, the working heart of the institution. That territory remained for decades an open question. In April 2025, that question received the most significant answer in a generation. Archaeologists working at the Ramesseum announced the discovery of a per-ankh, a house of life. This was the ancient Egyptian institution of advanced learning, known from texts for over a century. The place where the sons of nobles and officials were trained for careers in the state apparatus. A school in the most essential sense of the word, but more than a school. A scriptorium, a library, a place where knowledge itself was preserved, copied, and transmitted across generations. For a long time, Egyptologists had read about the House of Life in ancient documents. They knew it existed. They knew it was central to how Egyptian civilization reproduced itself intellectually. But they had never confirmed exactly where one stood, never mapped its actual floor plan, never identified its rooms with certainty. Until 2025. The excavation at the Ramesseum gave us the first confirmed architectural blueprint of an ancient Egyptian house of life. The first time in history that scholars could say, here is the room, here is the door, here is where they sat. And what archaeologists found inside was extraordinary. Student sketches scratched onto fragments of pottery and limestone, the ancient equivalent of a rough draft, a practice sheet, a notebook margin filled with clumsy attempts, remnants of teaching toys, small objects used in early instruction, worn smooth by the hands of children who had been dead for 30 centuries. Pieces of ancient learning tools, their purpose only now becoming clear. Think about what this means. A child, perhaps 12 years old, the son of a scribe or a minor official, sat somewhere in this building 3,200 years ago, scratching practice lines onto a chip of broken pottery. He was learning to write, learning to count, learning to become the kind of person who could run a province, manage a flood canal, record a harvest, draft a diplomatic letter to a Hittite king. And above him, on the walls of this very complex, the king's own version of history was being carved in stone. The battle he had won, the enemies he had crushed, the gods who had aided him. The child being educated inside the house of life would grow up to read those inscriptions, to copy them, to believe them, or perhaps, quietly, carefully, to understand the distance between the official account and the more complicated truth. This is what the 2025 discovery changes. The Ramesseum was never just a temple. It was never just a memorial to one man's need to be remembered. It was a complete system, a place that not only proclaimed the story of Egyptian power, but actively reproduced the human infrastructure necessary to sustain that power across centuries. The monuments told the story. The school inside the walls trained the people who would carry that story forward, who would staff the offices, maintain the canals, calculate the flood levels, negotiate the treaties, and eventually build the next set of monuments for the next pharaoh who needed the world to know his name. The colossal statue falls. The kingdom ends. The scribes who copied the poem of Pentor eventually stop being born. The canal silts up. The mud brick walls dissolve back into the earth, but the fragments left behind, the student sketches, the broken teaching toys, the smudged practice lines on cheap pieces of pottery, those survive. 3,000 years under the sand of the West Bank, waiting for someone with a brush and enough patience to find them. Shelley's poem is about the vanity of power, about how monuments crumble while the desert endures. But perhaps he had it slightly wrong, because what has lasted at the Ramesseum is not the Colossus. The Colossus is broken, its face staring at a sky it can no longer dominate. What has lasted are the marks left by ordinary hands, a child learning to write, a teacher correcting an exercise, the small and daily and entirely human work of passing knowledge from one generation to the next. That is what we found in 2025, not a lost tomb, not a cache of gold, something in many ways more profound. The first confirmed evidence of exactly how one of history's greatest civilizations taught its children to think. And somehow, against all odds, across 32 centuries of silence, those lessons endured long enough for us to find them.